It's more sensitive, so like film is sensitive usually from like 300 nanometers to 600 nanometers. The light is like 300 to 600 or so. And the film that I use is sensitive from 200 nanometers all the way to 1,000. And then it's cross-process instead of, no, it's not. It's codec EIR. So it's usually used for detecting defects in creative fields, stuff like that. And so I do portraits with it, and then cross-process. I'll show you a different way of looking at it. In terms of driving filters and something like that, that's what it looks like without Photoshop.
All right, guys, we're going to get started in just 1 minute. Yeah, could you?
And just a reminder to everybody, we do pretty much have all the DVDs available, so if anybody's interested in taking any home with them, just come see us out there in the hallway. Thanks. You'd be surprised.
Hey, was it any good? Did I rush it? It felt rushed. Okay. All right, everybody, I think we're about to get ready to get started. If you could, sit, because I can't yet. Anyway, we are Secure Science Corporation. The talk today is entitled Tracksploits. We will be discussing hackerish techniques used to sort of track and unmask fishers and identity thieves. I'm sure that there are probably a couple fishers in the audience. Did Matt make it in here yet? No, we're still waiting on our fisher. Okay. All right, well then I'm going to go ahead and have the boss man come up first. Lance, why don't you do your thing?
Good morning.
Dude, it's like 6.
Depends on the country. How was everybody? Yeah? Everybody partied out yesterday or what? All right, so just a background on us as a company / people. We spend our days tracking phishing groups and botnets and malware and anything that pretty much causes a disturbance on the internet. And so we have to give you an obligatory CYA disclaimer. I'm going to read it because I'm supposed to. Basically, rumored to be a dramatization of events. So these exploits that we are doing may or may not be, quote, ever used. Some of these tracksploits may have never happened. We're supposed to say this. This research is gray matter and may not be legal in all states. Please consult your local law enforcement office, lawyer, wise sage, prosecutor, etc. before attempting any of this at home. This presentation is for informative purposes and is designed to stretch the mind when devising counterintelligence methods involved in forensics. Again, we strongly suggest that participating parties seek legal advice before engaging in such activities. And you can read the bottom for yourself. So, what's a tracksploit? So it's kind of our new little term. A lot of people think it's tracking exploits. That you could be that way, but it's, in our case, it's different. As you can see the pronunciation there. Basically, it's utilizing subversive techniques to identify, track, detect, and deter online threats. In this case, we're going to kind of do a lot of examples with online phishing attacks and botnet and malware attacks that are usually used in data theft or in espionage. The tracksploit in our book must be legal, aka you can't literally, we're not sitting there basically, retaliating against hackers or anything like that. It's usually in conjunction with outside-the-box thinking. A lot of times people are very industry standard, and a lot of this actually is, a gray matter in that sense. Here we go. So basically, we've been tracking 53 phishing groups for a good while now, and most phishers / hackers all have patterns, and patterns in most cases predictability. Of course, heuristics and such, a lot of people who are familiar with that will understand this. So these phishing and hacking techniques all have also weaknesses, just like systems online have weaknesses, so do the phishers and the hackers with these patterns. So one of the things that we do is you're not going to underestimate the out-of-the-box thinking when we approach, how to actually, find a fisher or, break some crypto or this or that. So what we're going to do is, quote, tracksploit their weaknesses. A lot of this is done using defense. And I'm going to just review the phishing techniques that are popular today. There's imitating, which is basically a standard mirror of a fish site. Looks like of a bank. It usually either refers the images or it actually mirrors directly all the images. A forward is actually what you see with a lot of eBay, PayPal, and Amazon phishes, where basically the actual logins inside the actual email, and it's a submit post within that, and then usually the victim never sees the actual the blind drop or the itself, and it usually forwards them back to the real bank. Pop-up, which we sometimes see, it was very popular in the beginning, and it came back because of certain exploits they found to get around pop-ups. That's kind of a new arms race itself. So the pop-up is basically what you'll have is a real, like, Citibank or Wells Fargo in the back, and then a hostile pop-up in the front, and it adds for a lot of good validity because of the fact that you have the real bank in the back, the domain there, and it's just a pop-up asking for your information. And then we see key logging and form grabbing. With different Trojans we see out there, PWS Banker and Metafisher and Hackstore and such like that, different ones out there. So I'm not really going to go through this slide. Raise your hand if you know what phishing is by now.
Raise your hand if you don't know what phishing is.
Yeah.
Talk to me afterwards.
Yeah. Okay. So we all get an idea. It's basically pretext attacks, and it goes after innocent people that have no clue and can't raise their hand in this conference. So we're going to kind of go through some math. Recent logs of the last week on average are about 100 megabytes per day per phishing group. So if you get infected with a piece of malware and it's one strain that gets sent out and it's one distribution, we're finding that when we find the actual data logs, the logs that are stealing are about 100 megabytes a day. And it ranges, we have some that go 250, 200, some 50, but the average actual number is about 100 megabytes. This is basically gaining an average of 16,000 logins per day stolen from one phishing group, and that's usually, on average, there's about 5,000 credit cards in there. This varies, but we pretty much put a norm on this. Since January 2006, we have recovered 2 million plus credit cards just from Trojans alone. Basically, if you look according to the FBI statutory law in California, in which we're a California company, it's an average of $500 per card in potential loss. Now, the banks usually look that up more at $1,200 to $1,500. We see that the average hit on a bank is about $1,200 to $1,500. Action starts hitting and saying, hey, there's some malicious activity going on. So if you just take the conservative $500 per card, that's a $1 billion problem. Just for this in the last 6 months, 6 to 8 months. And that's just what we're seeing. We don't get all of this information, but our surveillance is actually just giving less, and that's a pretty alarming number. Here's an actual slide here that is basically, we watch one phishing group over a 4-month period. We're still watching them, but we're just posting you guys a trend here. Basically, what we did was we looked at the top credit card bins and said, okay, what banks are being the high targets of the stuff? And a lot of it is still based on their popularity as a bank, too. Bank of America bought MBNA, which makes them one of the top-tier credit card companies out there for distribution and circulation. And as you see, like the first month, we see Bank of America being the top, Citibank and Chase. And then we kind of go and you see the second month, there's a good-sized growth there. In the third month, there's almost more than a 50% growth, and it's starting to just go higher. As problem, the credit card theft is obviously a real serious problem, and it's not exactly getting better, even with all that fraud software out there and everything. So how the heck do we know about all this data? A lot of people are like, well, when we try to give it to certain financial institutions, we get multiple mixed approaches. Some of them think we're fishers ourselves. Some of them freak out. They don't want to know about this. And some of the people are very forthcoming and are very glad that they see this kind of information. So one case study is what's called Hackstore. The real name of it by the author is actually A311 Death by Corpse. It's a rootkit, basically, and a Trojan that basically utilizes farming and form grabbing to steal user data from client machines. Form grabbing is similar to what people call key logging, and it's actually the #1 method for malware that does data theft. And instead of actually logging the keystrokes, if you hit submit on your web browser, it's actually taking your headers and submitting them to a blind drop. So it's actually getting, when you log into a site, it actually gets that before SSL. This is written in assembly, and it's very popular with Russian phishers. We're seeing probably at least 10 to 20 distributions a week nowadays. So it's quite popular, but it's very clandestine in most cases, and we see an average of it getting discovered within 1 to 2 weeks. Here's what the phishers see when they're using this, Trojan. So they have kind of like, like NetBus and all the other ones. You basically have, control of their computer. You can freeze their computer, you can trash it, you can kill it. And then they can also, when you're actually setting up malware itself, they give you a Trojan creation kit, which is basically, they actually sell it online. Now, Hackstore is sold online for between $250 and $2,500. And basically, you get certain licenses with this as a Trojan creation kit. So they give the phishers a thing that basically lets them save an executable with their settings in it, and the permutation is different every time. And they license it like normal software, so they may get 5 different permutations with their license. So it's kind of neat. It's a little business. So basically, what happens is So what happens basically, in this case, this is obviously an open directory. Now, these are getting less and less, but we still have methods using inference. So what will happen, this is actually a nuclear grabber log, which is what's called Trojan.golden for most people who are in the AV industry. That's what they've pretty much titled it. And don't ask me why they do that, but anyways, I prefer just going to the name of what the virus author calls it. But basically what happens here is we can actually grab these log files because we analyze the malware and find the blind drops, and then we go after them. In a lot of cases, these directories are closed, but because we have worked with ISPs in the past, we know that we have the source code to their blind drops. We know what their files are going to look like. And a lot of times they don't chmod them properly, so we basically can just write a Perl script that actually gets these files every hour, every 5 hours, or whatever we want to do. Tricks for auto-analysis in this case. So we can actually come up with a Hackstore blind drop within 30 seconds of getting a copy of it. We basically use VMware, of course, and stuff, but you don't even need to get tricky with, once you understand the code base of Hackstore, how it works. It's actually a COM object basically hooking into Win32 API, not as a BHO, but when you deal with BHOs or any kind of IE hook-in that basically is a malware that's actually doing it, like MetaFisher is also a BHO version, a browser helper object. And what happens is it actually uses IE to send this using the HTTP send request A function. And so what will happen is you can just grab a free copy of IE HTTP headers, you can infect yourself with it, and basically is the minute it starts in it, you'll see some headers coming out of IE, basically connecting to the blind drop. This makes it easier, so we don't have to pull up Ethereal or any of the crazy stuff. We can just pretty much grab it and go. And then we can locate the blind drop, and we can monitor it and mitigate it by returning it back to financial institutions and law enforcement. The result to this is basically dead on arrival. And the reason why is that basically what happens is the time span between the time that they steal data and the time they use data is between 2 to 4 weeks. It is starting to increase because they're building search engines inside their malware, or their blind drops that allow them to search in real time, and it correlates it in a SQL database so that they can look up Wells Fargo or Bank of America as they're stealing this data. But in most cases, we've had it where we return it to a financial institution and we'll give them all their old data. They'll correlate it and say, yes, these have had fraudulent activity, but all the new real-time data that we continue to give them, basically they get to it before the phishers actually start using it, which is a little bit more preemptive than most situations. So we basically do full real-time risk mitigation in this action for track exploiting. So preemptive action, we kind of look at the code itself. One of the things that we wanted to look at with Hackstore is almost like 99% of Hackstore is packed with FSG, which is fast, simple, good. It's a common packer for malware. One of the things that we've kind of done is a study on how many non-malicious executables are packed with FSG, and so far we've gotten none, but I'm going to still say 99% are, and that 1% will be left for if we ever find any. But at this time, you can actually look at what it does. It talks to images.data.php. Some versions of images.stat7, PHP, bserv, depending on the malware type. A certain groups title msits, msys, and then there's, you can track different groups that have different names for the executables. They usually redo it because phishers take the path of least resistance in most cases. And then we basically put together some bleeding edge snort rules. We actually made a bunch of them, but I didn't want to fit them on this slide. But 2 very important ones, we actually tried on a major ISP that is a partner with us. Basically, we put in FSG detection. And what happened was, within 5 minutes on a very huge ISP, we found about 20 pieces of malware in 5 minutes. And only 2 of them were actually Hackstore. The other one were Brazilian, Australian, and Russian-based malware. So none of it was a false positive. We actually had very good success just pulling out FSG alone. And so we actually can rid a certain space of malware that's used with this packer. And so that's actually kind of neat. So now we know how to recover the data, but do we know how to prevent future form grabbing? So thinking outside of the box here, we were trying to say, hey, most people's anti-malware solution is to give something to the desktop or the client user. The problem with that is that when you're compromised, you must consider that localhost has no integrity. And when we look at Hackstore, we see a list of zone alarm, semantic Sophos, all this stuff getting shut off, and that's common. It's that arms race that we basically deal with. And so eventually, if you have a threat to them, they'll just put it in the list off your firewalls or whatever you have on. So we were thinking, okay, we need to find a way to do this so that it's on the server side, basically kind of Sun Tzu's art of war, take the higher ground. And then basically the idea is this, and this is not a silver bullet, we're not saying it is, it's basically something that will push them to about a year or two to evolve, because it's like spam assassin. As it becomes a true threat, they do start looking at, oh, let me test my spam through spam assassin, because it does affect my business. At this point, this technology would probably buy us a few years, before they evolve and you look at it as a serious threat. But basically what we do, this is the bank I use on a daily basis, First Bank of Phishing. And what we do is, to the normal user at home logging into their system, they don't see any difference of what's going on. So using live HTTP headers, just to show you, we actually encrypted this with an encryption algorithm. You can use whatever you want. But what happens is the JavaScript, we use JavaScript to basically send a key to the browser, but we use an extra namespace and put it in memory so that it's not just in the code, because Hackstore and Nuclear Grabber already grabbed the code of the page. This is why a site key is broken with Hackstore. But basically, we send a key to them. It's random. It only lasts 45 seconds. And what will happen is when they hit submit, it actually encrypts it at the JavaScript layer, HTML layer, sends it off to the server, and we have a decoder on the other end. And so when they do steal it, we basically assume localhost is already compromised for everybody, because the customer is the weakest link in the chain. And so you see this data here. This is obviously not Lance log, a bunch of, an IV and then the actual cipher itself. So it sends it. So when these guys look at it on their blind drop, they'll go, oh, gibberish, keep moving on. Because we saw there's a lot of gibberish in their drops anyways, whether it's encoded with something or just things they don't understand. So they'll just move on until it's like almost every bank has it, and then they'll be like a little bit ticked off about that. But so other things that we've been doing. Many phishers track their stats, whether it's a spam site that they want you to go to, like Viagra or whatever, or even in the malware we're seeing. And there's a lot of Russian groups that use hotlog.ru. Hotlog is basically a logging service, just like GeoCities has it's basically conversion rate. So what will happen here is we went to the Hotlog site to check it out, and it has an example thing of ustat / ID 23052. And so when we see a phisher's, either in the binary or actually using on a phish site, what will happen is they'll have their own ID, and they have a login and password and everything, but actually took the example site and put the other ID in there. It bypassed the login and password, and basically allowed us to just look at their stats. This has a lot of good things for us, because what we call victim zero is the phisher itself. Basically before the first victim gets hit or infected, we'll see first hits before the mass distribution, and we'll see like 50 IPs of the same IP coming in from Ukraine. How many times are you going to infect yourself with this malware? So most likely that's our phisher right there, and so we'll see that, and it's also sold because of the fact that we'll also see another 50 coming in from somewhere in Nigeria or somewhere in Australia, and it's very unlikely that the same person is infecting them themselves constantly, because as we go down the list, we see these victims and they get hit once, and then you can keep track of it. So you can see the mass hits, the geographical location of these hits, and you can see the victim hit statistics and IP information, so you can get an idea where's the high rate of infection. Now the cool thing about this is that these phishers are using this to also know this themselves. The newer malware like MetaPhisher and vBreeze is actually also they have actually a blind drop site that actually keeps track of all of this stuff for them. Web Attackers the same way with the exploits. Web Attacker is an exploit tool that basically has a bunch of brute forced exploits, and they keep track of which exploits are the most effective, what regions are getting most effective. And so these phishers actually do us a good job, a good service, because we can keep track of what they want to do, and they do all the work for us, which is good. We actually wrote an article in 2000. One of the first phishing groups that hit major banks. This enabled us to locate the tester a week before the distribution. We tracked all the referrers. We got idea of how many victims got hit from this site, and we located the scam kit developer that lived in Tybot's Corner, Delaware, which we ended up calling this group the Delaware Phishing Group, even though they're a Russian organization. Fun with IRC. I'm not going to mention the IRC server that this is the vulnerability to, but anybody who's clueful in probably figure it out. Basically, we tracked down the Dephonic crew by accident. I'll tell you offline how that happened. But basically what happened was we ended up landing on irc.dephonic.net. If anybody knows who the Dephonic crew is, also known as localroot.org, they did the LexisNexis hack and the Paris Hilton's mobile sidekick where they posted all the email up on a site. They were using cloaking encryption, basically part of this server. So what would happen is it hides the IP of the channel users. Here's some pseudocode just to give you an idea. So basically a 96-bit key divided up in 32-bit words, three 32-bit words, and then you would have your function for the IP address to actually encrypt. Your output would basically be some hexadecimal sets of 4, and then with an X depending on, it could be .IP, it could be X. It's really, it doesn't really mean anything except for, here's my parsing or whatever. And basically we looked at the algorithm. It was basically a CRC32 variant. It's a very linear algorithm. We basically decided to, see can we attack this. So we basically did what's called a related key and divide and conquer attack. And basically, the funniest part about this code is that it was an open source piece of code. So we looked at the cipher, and it had a double XOR in there, and then it had a comment that said to keep, crackers from cracking this encryption. If anybody has any background in XOR or encryption alone, you know that what a double XOR does just is reverses the problem. So their 96-bit key just suddenly became a 64-bit key for us. And then we did a divide and conquer attack, and this reduced the key to a search space of 2 to the 30th. I don't have my exponent in there, sorry guys. And then reduction of search time by a factor of 2 to the 66th. The new output, we got basically a IP address, and the key was broken within 5 seconds on an AMD 64. Fun with IM. Everybody have Trillion or know what it is? Yeah, raise your hand if you do. Basically, the background of it is basically it's a multiple, like game. It's like basically a commercial version. There's a basic version and a pro of just IM. You can have AIM, MSN, Yahoo, blah, blah, blah. Like a while back that they have secure IM using 128-bit industry standard encryption. They were kind of right. Basically what happened is they are truly 128-bit. How many people understand Diffie-Hellman in here? Okay. Most people understand that in discrete logarithms and large number theory you need large primes. You need safe primes and large primes. Well, they did do safe primes. They actually did Sophie-Germain primes, which is the proper way of doing that. Quickly speaking, basically a Sophie-Germain prime is basically you take your prime, you subtract it by divide it by 2, and that should be also a prime. This stops things like baby step attacks, Pauli-Hellman attacks, things like this, and a lot of general number field kind of sieve attacks. But the actual primes themselves were 128-bit. And basically, just to give a background on that, IETF Oakley primes have to be, group 1 is 1024, group 2 is 1536, and group 5 is 2048-bit primes. The highly recommended prime set for the lowest is 1536, the group 2 primes for 10-year span before you have to revoke a key. In this case, if you're the NSA or anybody bored, you could probably do a cooked prime attack on 128-bit space because there's not that many primes in the 128-bit space. So you could actually cook all the possible keys for this. And also another attack, which if you want to go offline, it's a kind of complicated attack, but there's an index calculus attack you can perform. The basic idea is you create a linear sieve of all the prime minus 1 divided by 2, that second prime you get when you divide it. Basically, you take it and you get all the primes up to that number, and you basically calculate smooth relations against that, and then you can basically have all the possible keys for that prime. So for a passive attack, you can basically solve this problem in 1 hour, and if you want to do an active attack, you can do a man in the middle anyways, because they don't know anything about actually distribution of Diffie-Hellman. So many phishing groups that in Russia we see using Trillion because they think it's actually secure. So that actually helps us when it comes down to passive analysis, or any kind of law enforcement if they're doing passive analysis. All right, I'm going to let Josh continue on botnets.
How's everybody doing today? I'm Josh Bashers. I'm an investigator and researcher with Secure Science Corporation, and I'm going to talk a little bit about botnets and some of the other tools that phishers are actually using. Let's see. So a botnet is considered to be typically a compromised host or a series of hosts used for phishing or for denial of service attacks or for transferring wares or any number of malicious purposes. Eggdrop is a really popular IRC bot. It was originally written to add functionality to IRC such as trivia or just interesting reports, slashdot headlines, what have you. And then there was another one called Energy Mech, which tended to lend itself a little bit more towards malicious purposes. It was a bit more modular, it had an easier configuration, but didn't seem to catch on quite as well as Eggdrop. Interesting thing about these botnet files, the configuration files tell you a whole lot about the group that are actually using them. If they are configured correctly, then they can be almost useless to the researcher, but generally they're not. They're created out of haste. They don't have too much thought put into them. And you can usually infer ideas or items like the geographical location of the attackers. You can tell by the bot master, the person who's in charge of controlling the botnet, will have a host mask saying, only allow me to control this botnet. And typically that will include an IP address or a host name, which you can then geolocate through various tools online to have a pretty good idea of at least where they were coming from or where they expect to come from the future. Other thing is password hashes. Once with their geographic location, or have a pretty good idea of where they're coming from, then we can infer which language files that we should be using for brute force password cracking attempt, and generally they tend to be pretty successful. Phishers don't put too much thought into their passwords. It's more of a secondary thought. They just want to get it up and running so they can increase their profit. So here we're looking at a bot configuration file that was written entirely in PHP. This one's a modified version of DemonBot, and we can see a couple things like the undernet node that they're connected which is in Montreal, the username of the bot, which is Fishsticks in this instance, and the port, which channel they're going to. And then there's a tagline on here that says, testing by GeoShell's team owned by Geonisi. Geonisi is a hacker out of Georgia, the country, not the state. And he is pretty proud of his abilities. But you can see his password isn't exactly the most cryptic or long password. Yeah, so that didn't take long to get into. Here's another sample of a configuration. This is, for brevity, we've trimmed down just the important stuff that we as researchers actually care about. You see the host that he's talking about. Anybody that knows the password and has their username as telnet in their IRC client will then be granted access to this bot file. And then we've got the username Geonisi, so it's Geonisi at telnet at whatever the host. And then we've got the encrypted password hash, which we can use various European language files and brute force. I don't know if you can read this very well. It's an output of a simple bash shell. What we ended up finding was, after tracking down a couple botnets and running them through Nmap and the whole kit and caboodle, port 5000 was open, which I thought was pretty interesting. A higher number of ports tend to yield more interesting results because you don't need administrator access to open them. And in this case, it was an unpassword protected backdoor. Anybody who bothered to tell me it would be free with the prompt. So a simple ls-lh showed a series of botnet configuration files, which had some interesting results. Our Fisher here didn't think it wise to remove his bash history file, and so we get a pretty good idea of what he was up to. Yeah, Perl, udp.perl, he's using UDP floods, so this guy's obviously elite. He's got his Unix COD botnet exploits and his floods. He's kind of clueless. What's going along here? Google hacking, if you haven't seen Johnny Long's talks about Google hacking, then you're probably pretty new to the industry. But result, Google hacking isn't actually hacking Google itself, but using Google, the search engine, and specifically crafted queries using their advanced operators to uncover information that would be interested to an attacker or a security researcher. Interesting thing about Google hacking is that phishers are really starting to use it, and through the refers of Apache logs, we can identify queries that we're using. This is pretty cool because we pop the query into Google, we see how they found the exploit host, and depending on the query, in this case it was an image view exploit that came out ago, we can, to a certain degree, predict which sites are going to infect, which sites have been infected, and we're seeing patterns that they're not trying very hard. Once they found their exploit, they're starting at the top of the list, and then they're just going down and infecting and infecting and infecting. So at the time of writing, and this was written about a month ago, there was about 1778 Google dorks, as we call them, on the iHackStuff forums. And in this example, we found 1,050 vulnerable hosts to this specific vulnerability, and a whole lot of phishing in terms of return on investment, one query. That's 1,000 different sites that we have to, as researchers, find ways to take down legally. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about scam kits. A scam kit is the actual phish itself. Typically, they're written in PHP or, in very rare cases, CGI or ASP, but they are designed to look exactly like the institution or the entity that phishers are trying to replicate. They are the meat and potatoes of the phish, so to speak. They are traded on internet relay chat, or they are passed around personally. They're generally pretty trivial. Save the page, change the image links, add in a little function to email the data that you've recorded and send it off away to a disposable email account. They generally don't take much skill, save for an entry-level day one PHP course. But they're not always exactly the same. And in fact, sometimes you can infer characteristics of the phishing group that's using them based on heuristics, based on type of comments or the specific way that they phrase the PHP. You can sort of identify trends in different groups, and you create a profile of these people, and then as we're starting to see more fish come across, we recover the data, and then we could say, okay, these are the Indonesians that like to go after this, you know, giant bank in America, and this is where they're sending it. They like to use Gmail accounts, and oftentimes, believe it or not, kind of just reviewed this. They reuse the email addresses in the blind drops because, well, they're lazy, or generally unskilled, or just don't care. They just feel so untouchable that they don't mind reusing them. These are ready-to-go kits. Just add water. This is an example of a PHP processing engine. It's, you know, what is that, 10 lines of PHP code. It's not exactly elite, but it gets the job done. So don't be a noob. Now, this is a little message. This is kind of a conflict of interest, but I spend hour after hour after hour at work looking at these scam kits, and it gets kind of boring. Googling these email addresses that people are using, we're finding some pretty ridiculous things. Namely, that they're reusing personal email addresses or handles, not just on the phishing sites themselves, but on hacker forums where they're talking about their phishing exploits, and maybe they let personal information slip about themselves, such as this particular individual is a fisher that was so damn proud of his DeviantArt page that he put a screenshot of his desktop using his hacker handle, using the email address to fish from, thinking that he was untouchable because he wasn't in the United States. And for whatever reason, I don't understand it. I'm not that big of a desktop geek. I've never taken a screenshot and posted it on a blog. We zoom in a little bit, and we see quite a bit more interesting information, such as the IRC channels that he hangs out in, which files are in his home directory, which music he likes to listen to. I don't know if you can see that out there, but he's got Yahoo Buddy IM, including his name, his friends' names, who he's hanging out with. You can't really see because we've obscured most. There's quite a few exploits in the directory tree. And then that brings me on to my favorite really dumb thing that phishers do. Now, I'm not going to rant about MySpace. I'm sure people use it. I know it helps a lot of people hook up or whatever, but if you're going to rip somebody off, change at least a digit or something in your handle before you make your MySpace profile, because we've got these people that are posting their handle, posting pictures of themselves, which they went to, where they live, who they know, what they hang out with, their family, their co-conspirators, everything. They're dropping docs on themselves. And all this legalese stuff, you know, I'm not really, I'm a researcher, so I'm going to hand it over to this guy. He tends to know a bit more about the law. So Lance, why don't you jump in here?
Or at least what they tell me the law is.
Yeah, or just know about it.
Okay, yeah. So in the industry that we're in the investigational type thing that we're doing and all that fun, whatever, basically the law that we usually have to abide and read about and make sure we're not doing anything illegal. And, you know, again, we always recommend you to call your AUSA or, you know, an attorney or whatever to make sure that you're not doing any, you know, law breaking here. But when all else fails, there's a section in Title 18 of USC 1030 that basically allows, if you're an ISP, is anybody here run or work with ISPs and stuff? Okay, so basically, in this case, it's always a good idea because law enforcement's doing what they can in this problem, with all due respect to that, but they have so many resources to tie to this, plus they have about 10 million pieces of paperwork before they can do one thing. And so with respect to that, a lot of investigators such as our company and other companies out there could actually assist ISPs in kind of, you know, what we call fish-proofing your ISP, because the source of the problem is at the ISP layer. You know, when you do takedowns all day, you're calling up ISPs. So if you're a telephone service provider, it's recommended that you write a terms of service that people basically agree to before they come onto your ISP. That basically states, you know, if you're going to commit any acts of illegal acts on our network, we are going to monitor you. We have the right to monitor you. And just consult your lawyer; they'll be able to put it together for you. The point is that it allows you to do fraud monitoring on your networks. Now, the same rule applies with IDS. What this means is, like, there was a law in California where even though it's your own corporation and you're providing IDS to your company, it's a highly recommended thing to give your employees basically a thing saying, hey, part of your employment, realize that your computer may be monitored, your networks are being monitored, things like this, because there's what they call an assumption of privacy law. It's a civil law, but no one likes to get sued either. So this is kind of also great for civilians. It's kind of like a Title III, which is like, I wouldn't say over wiretap anything. We're not, you know, with being an ISP, you do need basically make sure that you control what you are monitoring and you're not just monitoring everybody's information. But when you do want to track down these guys and you want to see what they're up to, or you want to set up a cPanel honey day, or whatever the newest exploit they're breaking into to find this stuff, it's kind of like a Title III for civilians, and it allows ISPs and us, or researchers, to come along and say, hey, can we get a copy of that hard drive when we don't need a subpoena? And the rule is you can't be directed by law enforcement to do this, or you do have to have a subpoena. But if you're doing it on your own volition and say, hey, I'm ISP, I'd like to get a hard drive copy if you can, so that we can analyze this and see what's going on. With that terms of service, that means they're allowed to do that and allowed to monitor it. Without a terms of service, it's considered a federal violation and considered, basically an illegal wiretap. So this is handy. What it does for a lot of researchers and ISPs alone is it enables those partnerships with researchers and security, gurus or whatever, and ISPs. This enables strong intelligence. You can build up profiles. What we do a lot of inference based. We found some different fishing groups, like the rock fishing group, that we actually got what their mothership is basically, or their base camp, where because they were using bots to basically front, like a firewall, the actual real site that was stealing all this data. So we worked with an ISP, we got a hard drive, we analyzed it, and we found like all the code, how many members in the group, what their nicknames are, and then we used it on future phishing attacks that we saw, and we would just go in and go /DNS/main.php, and it would give us the whole thing. We'd be able to take down their we could control their DNS, we can get all their names, we know what time it is, and we know where the next mothership is, because it says it all up in their mothership control panel, basically. So Title 18 is really focused on this rule. Basically, you're allowed to defend your network. You just have to let your customers know that they have to agree that it's okay for you to monitor them in that sense. And as I said earlier, IDS falls under this law. I'm going to give it back to Josh on this, because this is his little big project.
Sorry. So we've seen all this data. We've identified patterns. We understand the modus operandi of phishers, and at this point, now we're ready to get a little bit more aggressive. And so, not that aggressive. So Secure Science has been partnered with a research company based on the East Coast called HiTech Labs, and we've been working together to develop some new technology. One of our new products, it'll be open source, so that you'll be able to download it once the bugs have been polished out of it, is called ScamScan. It is essentially NIC2 for phishing. You run it against a site, and what it does is it goes through every possible combination of Wells Fargo known phishing scam kit names, or it looks for PHP-based backdoors, or botnet configuration files, checks for open directories, traverses the web structure, things like that. And it allows you to, within 10 seconds, just hit a button and get a nice little outputted report of, okay, what's probably the most likely way that we're going to be able to determine who's actually running this kit. Future concepts of this are integrated into another product that we're working on, which is called Wallfly. Wallfly is actually a botnet itself. What Wallfly's purpose is to monitor other botnets, but to provide a certain level of anonymity and safety to the researcher or the investigator monitoring the groups. So it's essentially just a Perl script that is an IRC daemon in and of itself, launches child processes which then connect back to itself into the centralized command and control server, and then you can issue botnet-style commands. It bears a striking resemblance to the commands that phishers themselves are using in their botnets to monitor them. Now, one thing that's nice about this is, since it's written in Perl, it's very lightweight, it's portable. You can rent a host somewhere and throw it on there and have a relative anonymity. However, if you don't want to spend the money on a host, it's also very Tor-friendly, so a good majority of the IRC clients, or excuse me, servers out there, will allow you to get to use Tor, and in that way we can provide another abstraction layer between us and the phishers, so that should they bust out their super leak rad udp.perl, we don't have to worry about it too much as researchers. And then another technology that we're working on is called Recon by Fire, and you can download this right now at mayhemiclabs.com. It is a CTCP shotgun, so to speak. You enter in the server, the channel name, and then a wildcard string of usernames that you want to look up. And what it does is it goes through every possible CTCP command and just fires at them at every person in the room to get information such as the IRC client version, which more often than not, if it is a bot or if it's masquerading as someone, or you can identify trends. Maybe every IP address in that room is on the same subnet, so maybe we can let the ISP know that they've got a big problem because every one of them in their class has been compromised. And so another thing that phishers are using is what's called a C99 PHP shell, which is like a generic PHP command pass-through, except it's got a lot of built-in functions such as PHP reverse connect, so that you can have a shell like we showed earlier, or just use a password if you're going to do that, guys. Come on. And then there's the R57 one. A quick note about the R57 command shell. It was recently noted that on top of being used to root boxes, it also phoned home to the R57 crew, so that every time you own a box or a Fisher owns a box with that command, with a PHP script, then the Russians who wrote it also have access to that site. So sites are finding themselves owned continuously instead of just one cockroach. There's several hundred. And I'm going to go ahead and plug Lance's book for him so he can be humble here. Phishing Exposed came out last year. What was it? Yeah. October? Yeah. December? Yeah, thereabouts. It's pretty good. If you're interested in more about what we've got to say, you did a great job, and highly recommend it. So we're getting the note for time. Does anybody have any questions? We've got some swag, some T-shirts to give out for the good questions. Yeah, you in the back?
Yeah, back to the Title 18, did that also apply to web companies that do on their PCs?
What was the last part of that sentence?
Title 18, does that apply to web monitoring and companies that do monitor computers and web access?
Yeah, it's like HoneyNets kind of fall under that, any kind of web monitoring, any kind of passive monitoring that customers may be involved in. If there's any kind of privy information and any possible confidential information, you can't just monitor anything. But in that sense, you check your law books on this and kind of consult lawyers and stuff. I'm not a lawyer. But I would believe that depending on the situation, Title 18 could fall under that for fraud monitoring specifically. Go ahead. I'm very familiar, and I'm really familiar with who Gotti is. Him and I are not friends. I have my own list. It's called Malware. And I'm involved in a lot of different lists, yes. Go ahead.
Have you dealt with any VoIP pass-through phishing scams? Basically, they set up an Astra server that then dials the call center for the actual bank.
The phishing stuff, yes. That's actually the first one we saw was Chase. That happened. Strom down here actually, he's kind of a partner of ours individually, but we contract work to him, and sometimes he comes out and he came out with a copy of it. Was it Wells Fargo?
Yeah, it was the Wells Fargo IVR menu. Basically, I just called up Wells Fargo's IVR menu, made recordings of all their prompts, threw it together on my Asterisk box, sliced it up, made a little script that just kind of prompts the caller for their account number and their PIN, and then transfers to a live human being, which could be anybody. But essentially, you just capture their account number and PIN without them even realizing it.
Right, and you could man in the middle back to another call center, the real call center for the human being, exactly. So yeah, we're seeing phishing. Also, on the other end of it, we also have a lot of caller ID spoofing used in phishing, where they'll call Western Union, spoof the caller ID with the credit card holder's number, and Western Union won't call you back because on their screen it's actually valid, the billing number for it. And so they'll be able to say, I want to transfer $500, I'll go pick it up with a fake ID or whatever. So they use that as a cash out method as well. So we're seeing that, and the phishing is becoming more popular. It really, that we're seeing with links and then justifying it with a number is starting to be the trend, so that there's two ways, and it gives them a way to kind of feel more confident in the quote phish. Oh, go ahead.
Under Title 18, isn't it the monitoring has to be done as part of normal business operation? What you're doing, does that fall within that?
Well, we're not, quote, the ISPs doing the monitoring, which is their normal business operation to monitor and mitigate security risks. So IDS is a security, it's basically a wiretap device, basically, as we know. It's just filtering certain things. So in that sense, basically, as your business, your point is to defend your network. And if you want to put a HoneyNet under that, a lot of the times you can, because that's what you're looking at, threat intelligence, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, but in most cases, standard business operating stuff with the actual action against fraud itself, specifically because USC 1030 is specific on computer fraud. So when you're investigating that and you're using that intelligence off of your IDS or whatever it was, it becomes legal for you guys as an entity as long as that terms of service is applied. Yeah, we've had ISPs that won't do that at all. They'll say, get an FBI agent to call us and get a subpoena. And then we have a lot of good ISPs that'll basically, what'll happen is we'll find some forum that's doing something and it'll be hosted there. And I'm like, hey, can you send me the PCAPs every day for the next 2 weeks? And they'll set up an FTP server and send us PCAPs. And they can do this legally because the subscribe to the ISP have agreed that, hey, I can be monitored if I'm doing something malicious. So, yeah.
Do you find you deal often with problems with jurisdiction when, hackers from Russia outside the United States are attacking U.S. targets?
This is one of the reasons why we created the malware list, is that we have, Australia, France, UK, SOCA group, Aucert, the Lexi group from France. So a lot of times when we do like set projects, what we'll do is put together a task force, set up a separate list, have the people on that task force, and we all work together in conjunction. But what'll happen also is that, with FBI, like if we get FBI involved or Secret Service or whatever, they have what's called LEGAT, right? So for them to talk to a foreign country, they have to go through the paperwork, So what we do is if FBI happens to be on a mailing list or something like that that we run, and that communication's there, that kind of bridges some of that, or a little bit kind of goes around it, as long as the FBI is not, quote, engaging and have to call them and stuff, but it helps them have intelligence in the U.S. and still work internationally with these people. And then if it comes to the point there's enough intelligence, obviously law enforcement will come along and say, yeah, we need a LEGAT, let's get that going and stuff. And it gives them kind of like a buffer space to getting that done. And we have a lot of different international projects right now for some major virus authors and some, different investigations and stuff. So yeah, we get a lot of international help for sure. We're done? Are we done, or what's that say? I have no glasses. 10 minutes? Go ahead.
Just out of curiosity, how many of your problems end up being on EU's universities, I2 versus, capable?
We haven't seen one problem on I2 perspective yet. Then again, we're not monitoring I2 yet. So if there's other problems on I2, I2 is a bridge to the internet anyways. I mean, they're connecting the two pretty much. So if that comes into a problem and stuff, I mean, we have the IPv6 stuff in IRC to kind of give somewhat anonymity and such, but it's not exactly an impossible problem to deal with. But we do see a lot of stuff on universities, that's for sure. Okay. So yeah, we see a lot of university stuff. A lot of these phishers end up being students at universities in different countries or in here. I mean, in the States we find more of drug problems with the people that are doing this kind of activity, whereas in Europe or so we actually find more of it's like a business. And it's not necessarily drugs that are motivating, more just not the best economy. Like you have Romania and Russia, which Russia unfortunately has got a lot of corruption going on. As you saw, the banker, the anti-fraud banker, if anybody heard in the news, was gunned down, I think it was last week or a week and a half ago, because he was shutting down all these Russian banks that were doing corruption and money laundering. And then he ended up getting killed by some money launderers himself, and through what they believe is a contract killing. So unfortunately, that tells us, oh, these guys have teeth. They really want their business. But some of that, I mean, pays for a lot of, the economy, unfortunately. And so it's like we're empathetic but not sympathetic, if you know what I mean. Like we understand the culture, but, it's still a crime, and, we have, kind of, so it's stuff that makes sense.
What I've observed working for an I2ISP is a lot of students who do phishing, using my voice from last night.
Yeah, no problem. I have the same problem right now.
They literally will only target other I2 universities, and they do that to avoid exposure to I1, going to Horizon Quest or something like that. We notice that's becoming more and more of an issue.
Yeah, we're not on I2 right now, so we don't, but if you want to talk to me afterwards, maybe we can talk about getting together and kind of doing a partnership of getting some intelligence our way on that stuff, and we'll help mitigate any problems over there and do some investigations. So, anybody else? All right. No, just kidding. Yeah.
How much personal retribution have you guys got directly from the visits?
I got one.
Okay, let me start with my basics and let him answer his one recently. He actually got retribution back too. So just last week I actually had to move to Tor on some of the blind drops we're monitoring, because these guys were like, oh, well, your sets of IPs, I'm going to just block you, and then we've actually had it where I'll be monitoring an open directory, and then it suddenly changes and says die yuppie index.html, and so I'll just inference because they're still idiots. But the point is that I mean, we've seen stuff like that. We haven't had, we're pretty discreet on how we do our stuff. We have a distributed environment, so they're not going to quote say, oh, it's secure science doing this stuff, So we've kind of kept, our activities that are really important pretty discreet about this stuff. I mean, if our company itself, you can see our web pages, we don't even really explain our products very often because we don't want phishers knowing technologies we're using, what we're doing for some of the stuff that we're doing that's pretty advanced. This is stuff that we have no problem talking about. Let me get Josh to get the other part of this, though.
Okay, so a couple of the people that work with us in our company or have relationships, we encountered a fisher in IRC, and he really wanted to know if anybody had roots. He just wanted roots so damn bad so he could set up a scanner because you need roots to run Nmap. Didn't even think about, I don't know, installing Linux himself, but he was trying to trade, and all of us basically told him to piss right off. And so he busted out his udp.pro, and he knocked a couple of us offline. And I have to give a screaming review for the Netgear FES 114 VPN router, because although a couple of us did get plinked right off of the internet, I managed somehow to stay on without missing a packet. And the really cool thing was it kept logs of all the IPs from the fragmented UDP packets. And so we took those and plugged them into Undernet, got lucky, found a couple of the botnet hangouts, and that's where all those configuration because those are the guys that left the web shells open. So yeah, there are people that try. I'm more concerned about the organized crime element than I am just the random skiddies. But generally, they're not that smart, and that's why they're fishers in the first place and not hackers. And I just don't plan on going to Russia or Romania anytime soon.
But the cool thing about how we do it, like Josh's attack that he had wasn't on our network. We have separate networks for all this investigation stuff. So it doesn't affect like on this or that, and they don't say, oh, this is a secure science IP.
That's
so,
why we use Tor now.
Yeah. Okay, fine. Okay, anybody else? Oh, yes.
What kind of mix are you seeing between the real, honest-to-God Russian mafia and the skids?
What kind of what, sorry?
What mix you're seeing?
We actually, let me kind of go in some history there. So 03, 04, very covert Russian style stuff, right? And then we have what we call the chaotic groups, basically the Romanians that are pretty much traders online. You can pretty much make busts pretty easy comparably, depending on the extradite laws and all the fun stuff. But the point being is that for a while, those are definite skiddies, and then we had these very serious, very, using encryption, very, very careful on how they did stuff. The Russian organized crime today is so huge, like in the sense of the business. It's become like a corporation for these people, that they're more overt, and they're open to being on forums, trading with different players on this, and they're utilizing that so it's less neck in the business. It's kind of like allies versus enemies, right? There's no point, but there's a lot of, it's kind of like market share. You got these Romanians taking a piece of the market, and Romanians are a lot more aggressive, whereas organized crime tends to be more tactical, and organized crime tends to get a lot more data quicker, because they are truly organized in that sense, and they have higher technologies. Most of these Romanian kids just use free software out there and stuff. But the bottleneck is killed now because you've got Trojan creation kits, you've got things that are advertised on these different forums, like literally have ads like need money, cash-win.biz, and it's a, get your cash out today, or, or need roots, need shells, and it's like full on like, like a Ford ad, but it's like these like illegal activities, and we'll see, nuclear grabber, and it has the radiation, symbol on it, and it's like, starting at $250, that kind of thing. And so they are becoming more overt because of the fact that they're not afraid anymore. They've got this down to to the point that go ahead and it's like, okay, you stop a few of us, it's like spammers, right? You can stop a few spammers, it's like, uh-oh, you saw blue security. So, go ahead.
Any China?
I can't comment. I'm not allowed to. I can neither confirm nor deny. Let's just say it that way. I'm sorry, I can't. I'm not allowed to talk about any of that. No, it's not your. We're under certain contracts. Anything else? Good. Go home. Cool. Just kidding.
Thanks for coming out. If you didn't get a shirt and you asked a question, come up here real fast. Yeah, and thanks for our sponsors who gave us the swag to hand out. Appreciate it.